It is my pleasure to say that the Abrahamic religions are dying. Personally, I specialize in using a combination of common sense, history, sarcasm, and the Bible itself to defeat Christianity. People like me can make the end of a religion quicker and easier, but we cannot eliminate the religion. Those who can and will eliminate the religion are the last ones to abandon it. How so? Let's look at 6 signs that forebode the death of a religion, and precisely the Abrahamic religions. Number 1. The imperfections of the human body. People of the Abrahamic religions say that depravity, disease, and death were introduced to the world as a result of humanity's first sin. So let's look beyond depravity, disease, and death. Observe the normal imperfections of the human body. Religious people say that God's handwork is perfect in every way possible, almost as if they purposely overlook the imperfections in favor of promoting their beliefs. Asymmetry, misproportion, misalignment. There are animations with more accurate facial symmetry and proportion than in this creation, which is supposed to resemble God's image. Did sin give people a lazy eye, or misproportionately large facial features, or unequal jawlines? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Christian apologists have been looking for ways to excuse these normal imperfections. Ultimately, there is no reason to conclude that sin caused these imperfections, because they are not directly harmful in any way, and they're not equally everyone's problem. Number 2. The uselessness of prayer. I was sitting in church one evening during a sermon about what Jesus meant when he said,
"Whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you."
and
"Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it."
I was intrigued to hear what the pastor had to say about it, because he is an educated and intelligent man. But in the end, his answer was as such. Jesus meant that whatever you ask in his name, he will do, if it aligns with the will of God. Even though I was spiritual back then, I thought, well, what's the point? I mean, what's the point of asking anything if it won't happen unless it aligns with his will, and what he wills will happen anyway? It's obviously a desperate explanation for all the prayers that have went unanswered. Everything that happens can be explained as God's will, or God's plan. But the funny part is when you point out all the terrible things that have ever happened, believers will blame it on the devil or on the sinful ways of the people. So if you're a Christian, I ask you this. Can the devil and sinful people cause things to happen against God's will? And if not, does this mean that the devil and the sinful people have been doing God's will after all? And by the way, saying that God gave them the freedom to choose does not explain whether they have been acting in accordance with or against God's will. In the end, it can only be one or the other. But back to the point. People are realizing that there is always a lame explanation behind their unanswered prayers, and that prayers are nothing better than crossing their fingers and hoping the best. Their version of the best, that is. Number 3. People's reliance on their own capabilities. After people realize that the only thing prayer can do is give them the tingles and some confidence, they prepare to take matters in their own hands. When they are threatened, they have weapons to defend themselves. When they are in danger, they call their local law enforcement agency. When they need resources, they work or apply for social benefits so that they could live. When they get sick, they go to a doctor for operations and medicine so that they can survive. Faith becomes a compulsion in urgent matters, and prayer becomes a useless custom which is practiced by those who still find it hard to accept that their faith is nothing better than a drug addiction. Of course, this is nothing new, but the more advanced technology and medicine become, the more irrelevant religion is becoming, and those who attribute scientific and mechanical advancement to God's grace are becoming sillier by the day. Number 4. Effectiveness of medicine on people who suffer from psychosis and other mind-altering conditions. Psychosis is a mental illness which causes someone to lose touch with reality and believe or experience things that are not happening outside their head. This could be hallucinations, like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or physically feeling things that are not there or cannot be scientifically explained. Or delusions, like solemnly believing that something is the case, when it is actually not. Such conditions are often mistaken by religious people for divine revelations or demonic possessions. Just imagine when illnesses like psychosis affected people in ancient times or during the Middle Ages. Until now, we don't have a cure for psychosis, but we have medicines that can reduce, limit, and even stop psychotic symptoms when taken regularly. If people are actually seeing demons and hearing angels, how would medicine work at all? Does medicine work like some sort of repellent for the supernatural? And if demonic possessions are real, wouldn't it make more sense that demons possess the most vulnerable victims? Like the victims who are the furthest away from God and who are considered empty vessels, like non-believers and blasphemers? Ironically, we only hear of demonic possessions among those who are strictly religious, and we are not even hearing of them like people did a few centuries ago. Churches are encouraging people to seek medical attention when they experience such problems. That's because today, more people are acknowledging the problems for what they really are, and churches do not want the legal liability. They tell their troubled members something like,
"We will pray for you, but there is no harm in consulting a doctor."
I find it funny because a few hundred years ago, God was doing hocus pocus all over the place. In fact, after the New Testament, miracles were supposed to become much more common, according to what the Bible states. Truth is, conditions that cause hallucinations and delusions are exactly why most people spend their entire lives relying solely on their faith, while a few others hear God, speak to angels, and see trolls. Surprisingly, a few pills can ward off angels, trolls, and God. Number 5. Secular governments. A few hundred years ago, European governments were still torturing and executing people who left Christianity or spoke against it. But within those last few hundred years, Western governments separated religion from politics and introduced rights that respect their people's personal freedom of choice. When not bound by fear of persecution, torture, and death, the non-believing demographic started growing and showing. The opposite is also true, as we can see that the regions which statistically hold the lowest non-believing demographics are the Middle East and North Africa, where people still fear persecution, torture, and death for leaving their faith. But with the leading countries becoming secular and relocation becoming easier than ever, people who fear persecution in their own countries are fleeing to the secular ones, where they can enjoy their basic human rights and privileges. And number 6. Time elapsed after religious claims go unfulfilled. How long do you think people will wait for the appearance of the Messiah, Jesus, or the Mahdi? Another 500 years maybe? Another 1,000? 10,000? 100,000? Do you really think that after a million years, people will still be saying,
"Come, O Lord Jesus"?
People have been able to ignore Jesus' promise of making his second coming during the same generation of his first disciples, which I addressed in episode 2 of my series, Questioning Christianity. But the Abrahamic religions are products of the last few thousand years, products which were produced precisely during the times when civilizations still wiped their rear ends with sticks and stones. It has only been around 200 years since science began overshadowing Christianity in the Western lands, and 142 since the first light bulb was invented. And we can already see how religion is becoming less and less relevant to modern societies by the day. Religious leaders are struggling to maintain their followers by exploiting the obscurities found within religious texts, and creating interpretations that fit and appease the secular norms of modern Western societies. And despite that, they are hardly able to create convincing arguments in front of the younger generations, who grew up watching programs and attending schools which teach them to use common sense and common logic from their earliest years. People won't need to be exceptionally intelligent in order to come to the conclusion that the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran are just made of superstitious Middle Eastern folk tales, because the discoveries and knowledge of exceptionally intelligent people is becoming freely accessible to anyone, if not everyone, and people are becoming less ashamed to think for themselves and question their beliefs. But most essentially, it's because nothing religious is happening in the world. The world is how it's always been, and the flaws of these religions are being exposed before the entire world. All the while, it seems like the only thing that God can do about it is play peekaboo with his followers and awkwardly play brass instruments out of nowhere.
Kita telepon.
The time that the Abrahamic religions will stop being sold is the time when no one buys them anymore. That's the time when people will look at religious texts and wonder how primitive their 21st century ancestors must have been for buying into such nonsensical, self-defeating beliefs. That's when they will look at 21st century Christians like 21st century Christians look at 1st century pagans. That's when the Abrahamic religions will go extinct.